If you like The Daniel Blair Show, you will love Main Event Moto. Come join producer Joe and I at patreon.com/maineventmoto, where we talk Supercross, we talk Motocross, and deliver 3 long-form podcasts per week with no commercials. Again, that's patreon.com/maineventmoto, or you can click the link in the bio. Thanks for watching, and enjoy this week's episode of The Daniel Blair Show.
The Daniel Blair Show, sponsored by motosport.com, Mika Metals, Race Tech, ASV Inventions, and Guts Racing.
So many storylines heading into Millville, but there can only be 10 lead stories. And we start with number 10, Chase Sexton, who made his return at RedBud after missing 4 rounds of racing due to a weird crash and an even weirder exit from the opening round at Paula. I'll get to the weird stuff in a second. On paper, 5-4 Moto scores with bad starts and a tip over late Moto 2 is not good for a defending champ. And if you didn't watch the race, you may think it was an epic fail, but it was not. Like almost everything in this sport, there's more to it, and the context behind a result or a story tells more than the black and white on paper. I was actually inspired by the ride, and it has me pretty fired up heading into Millville. Jett put on one of his best rides ever Moto 2, and Chase followed him all the way through, with the second fastest time in the Moto, in traffic, and even though it didn't work into an epic battle with Jett, it gave us a glimpse of what we may see the next few weeks and months. He looked good, and he looked powerful, and the eye test in the second half of Moto 1 and most of Moto 2 told a different story. This wasn't the defending champ limping back into racing. It was a guy knocking the rust off and showing that he is most likely the true number 2 450 rider in the series. Now to the weird stuff. The crash at Paula was extremely weird. Pulling his goggles off on the opening laps at Paula was weird, and it led to the crash. The way he got up and limped back to the truck and did not return for Moto 2, that was weird. The press release stating he was banged up was also weird. The Twitter correction of Lewis Phillips' timeline of his return, that was also weird. The fact that he had a timeline for return following an injury called banged up was really weird. Watching him ride on Instagram the last few weeks, but not race, was weird too. This whole thing is weird, but not if you dig a little below the surface. To me, this looked like a guy whose emotional gas tank had hit empty, and instead of just lining back up and taking the beating, which he has done more than almost anyone in this sport the last few years, he decided it was not a good move long term to just grit it out, and he took a break. Chase has proven he's tougher than anyone physically. I mean, who has crashed more often and harder than he has while still powering through to a 450 Supercross and Motocross championship? Nobody. He's also had it pretty rough from the fans online over the past year or so, deservedly, due to big mistakes and big moments, but that takes a toll as well. He's human. I believe the 4-week break he took was for mental and emotional recovery after a brutal Supercross loss to Cooper Webb while dealing with the weight of the decision to leave KTM for Kawasaki. And instead of just charging through the first chunk of the Motocross championship that he was 50 points down in, he said, screw it. I'm going to take a minute to get right, I'll come back when the tank is full, and I'll go race my dirt bike. As fans, we hate that. The gate feels less exciting without the defending champ on it, but for the long term, which this guy still has to consider, it was probably the right move. He took a break. I get it. He reset. I get it. And he's the one riding the bike and taking all the risks, so I'm not going to question the decision. However, this wasn't the first time he's done this. Remember when he chose to leave Honda for KTM? Summer of 2023, he did the exact same thing. Came back and he was fine. And at RedBud, regardless of the 5-4 score, he showed that he can come back and be elite. And again, I'm pumped for Millville. Now to the decision to leave KTM. He won the 2024 Outdoor Championship on that bike. He should have won the 2025 Supercross Championship on that bike, and at RedBud, the bike looked good. As much as I'm defending this little break he took, I can't defend the decision to move to Kawasaki, and I've consistently questioned this move. I don't get it. It wasn't over money, and there was no fallout with personnel. So what was it? They gave him the forks he wanted, which Coop never got. They gave him his own program at Baker's factory, but on his own, which nobody's ever gotten, and I've never heard that a check didn't clear. I don't get it. Now, I hope I'm wrong about this. Being right is never my goal when I throw out my thoughts and my analysis on things, but I do think this was a terrible decision. Why leave a winning bike and a winning team to start over on a new bike and a new team that hasn't won a championship since Eli Tomac back in, 2020? Why gamble on the unknown and the unproven when your current team and bike has done nothing but win, with and without you? To me, it looks like an emotional decision from a guy whose emotional tank was bogging on empty when the decision was made, and I do think he'll regret it. I know the media's role in the sport has been questioned the past few weeks for good and for bad, but someone needs to ask him point blank, why did you leave KTM for Kawasaki? And it needs to be asked right now. We all know the truth. We all know what's happening. And if this sport wants to be a big boy sport, then the question needs to be asked and answered. The way to make change is to force it sometimes, and it would not be out of bounds to ask the defending champ why he is leaving his team. I won't hold my breath. The SMX Next Combine is lead story number 9. It was back at RedBud, and it gave us one of the most entertaining and emotional races we've seen all season. It was the Landons that stole the spotlight, first being Landon Gordon, who got his redemption after last year's heartbreaker. Last year he had the race won until the final corner, where he tipped over and gave it to his teammate Drew Adams, who put on one of the most epic rides of his amateur career from a million miles back to the top of the podium. But this year, Gordon went 4-1 on the day and added a combine win to his resume that already has 2 SMX Next Futures wins on it. Nice work, Landon. But this year for Landon Gibson, it was pure heartbreak. Moto 1, he sliced through the field for the win, and in Moto 2, he had a 22-second lead, had the fastest lap time in 11 of 12 laps, then had a late race bike issue that ended the moto. I'll just leave it there. After the DNF for Gibson, the podium was rounded out by my boy Luke Fowser on his KTM Orange Brigade machine, and Jessen Turner, a young up-and-comer on the Club MX team, who was also on the podium at Daytona's SMX Next main event back in March. These two have been going at it all month back at Club, and honestly, I'm not surprised by the outcome, with the work they've been putting in and day out. Nice work, boys. Moving forward, I do believe it's time for a real SMX Next Championship, the final piece to the puzzle, and one of the fixes needed for amateur racing. The bridge between amateur and pro has always been messy, but these SMX Next races have created a platform for young amateur kids to learn what pro racing is, without having to race against grown men with kids, who are still in the 250 pro class. Yes, the Jetts, the Haydens, and the Cole Davies types do exist, but we've ruined more careers than we've made in this current format. Age does matter. Experience and maturity matters too, and the current system is brutal for these super talented and fast kids who don't have everything put together yet. They need to learn that putting together an entire season is more important than throwing everything you have at one moto, which is not how pro racing works. And with a championship format, these kids will learn that a real championship is won over the course of time, not by just sending it for a week or a weekend. The kids will get smarter and the sport will get safer. The infrastructure is already there. 5 Supercross Futures rounds, 3 combines, and now 2 All-Star races locked in for Charlotte and St. Louis. A 10-event SMX Next Championship is perfectly in place to run a full series, and it's time to flip the switch. Yes, the race day format would need a shift a bit, maybe even some scheduling tweaks on the weekend, but the moves they've made over the last couple of years have been pretty much perfect. I agree with all of it, including the age rules that are changing too. In 2027, you'll have to be 18 to be pro and 16 to race SMX Next. Both are smart changes. If this happens, I believe every factory rig is going to get with it pretty quick. They'll have a young buck in the truck, learning from the 250 and 450 guys, getting TV and media time, and it will solidify the bridge between amateur and pro. Families will slow things down, put less emphasis on the results in the mini bike days of racing, and will focus more on development in the early teen years, instead of just rushing towards the pros. It's the direction we should be going, and I've said this before many times. SMX Next Futures and Combines are one of the biggest and most meaningful improvements we've seen in this sport in the last decade. The only thing missing is a championship, and it's time to flip the switch. Lead story number 8 is the prime numbers that I nerd out over every couple weeks, and it's time to check in on them. Here they are at the moment, and as you can see, Garrett Marchbanks is still holding on to the number 10, even though he had a terrible 10-12 showing at RedBud. Seth Hamaker's day wasn't much better, even though the 5th in Moto 1 was pretty solid. Juju continues to struggle with a 16-13 day, while Michael Mosman is sneaking up on these boys. Chance Hymas will drop out of the 20s here soon, while the battle for 23 will most likely be decided by teammates Max Volan and Cody Schock, and Jordan Smith, who currently sits at 29. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, These are the current point standings and available rider numbers for 2026. And to think that Marchbanks and Mosman are still rideless at this moment is both mind-numbingly silly and ridiculous. Watch out for Nate Thrasher and Jorge Prado. They may be breaking into the 20s soon. Lead story number 7 is Ryder D, and RedBud was the bounce-back ride he's been desperately needing, and it looked like he had a point to prove from the very first lap of the day. He was the fastest in qualifying both sessions, proving that it was not a fluke, it was a mini statement, saying, "I'm better than what I've shown." He finished 6th overall, which was his best of the season, and on paper it might not scream breakthrough, but if you know what he's been through this year, it absolutely was. It's been rough. Really rough. The injury during Supercross was worse than most people realize. He needed time, physically and mentally, and although he's had a few inspiring laps here and there this summer, it wasn't a true testament for the hill he has been forced to climb. So what does he do? He makes a big move, literally across the country, packs up, heads east, and joins the crew at the Baker's factory, and like James Stewart said on the broadcast, the soil out east is way more relatable to what they raced at RedBud, and to most tracks on the schedule. The ruts and the rhythm of the tracks are way closer to Florida than to SoCal, and Ryder D's ride at RedBud was a big step in the right direction, and the move helped for sure. But I don't think the bounce back is just because of the move. That would be a silly conclusion. Ryder has always loved the gnarly, deep, brutal conditions at RedBud for some reason. He made his pro debut here. He's had standout motos here before, and sometimes there's just something special about a track that brings out the best in a racer. And again, he needed more time to get himself right. But here's the big takeaway for me. Sometimes it just takes a little win to change everything. The sport is brutal. Things can spiral fast, and if you lose confidence and lose direction, results can fall off a cliff quickly. But it works the other way too. One ride, one result, one spark, maybe a fast qualifying session or two, and everything can shift back fast. You remember who you are. You build a little comfort, and a little confidence follows, and from there you can go on a run. I believe that's what RedBud was for Ryder D, a turning point, you might say. My gut tells me he's about to go on a little run here. Watch out these next 2 weeks, specifically watch Washougal. Let's clear something up right away in lead story number 6. Jalek Swoll is not a waste of money. Who said that? Is this a TikTok thing? The podium slap he dropped after Moto 2 was directed at someone, and it was perfect. I like a little attitude, a little fire, and a well-earned celebration. And I'll say this again, I think this dude is underrated. Jalek was 2nd overall, not the best result of his career. He actually won High Point a few years back, but with a brutal Achilles injury before the season and only a few weeks back on the bike, this is pretty massive. He's never been the flashiest guy out there, but he gets starts, he stays in the fight, and he somewhat quietly always gets results. That number 22 on his bike wasn't an accident. It was from some serious point stacking last year. I do think we'll continue to see him in the mix this summer. Maybe not every weekend on the box, but more often than not, I think he'll be up front on screen. This was also a huge day for Triumph. 3 riders in the top 10 in Moto 1, 2 in the top 5 in Moto 2, 2 in the top 4 overall, and at one point, Triumph was running 1-2 out front. Jordan Smith had himself a wild moment. Bro, what was that? But what a rad day for the team, and that is the real story leaving RedBud. The learning curve of a new brand is pretty tough, and although Triumph is celebrating now, let's not forget, last year was pretty ugly. They took some hits, they looked lost at times, they had bikes on the side of the track, but they kept grinding and kept developing. And now they've got a Supercross win with Jordan Smith, a Pro Motocross podium with Jalek Swoll, and soon-to-be Rookie of the Year in Mikhail Harup. That's fast progress and well-earned. Meanwhile, Ducati made their debut, and yeah, it was a somewhat rough look on the TV screen. But let's be honest, Moto 1 was good, maybe even great. Antonio Cairoli was solid, and the stock bike looked promising on camera, and the starts were way better than I expected. In Moto 2, Tony was off the track giving CPR to his fuel line, and it was over. But guess what? Triumph looked just like that a year ago. It's part of the process. You don't jump into the sport and win overnight. You learn, you adapt, you get the right people on board, which they have, you test, you fail, and then you break through. Triumph is living proof. So yeah, Ducati's day didn't end the way they hoped, but the bike showed promise. It was definitely enough to build on, and if they keep pushing like Triumph did, I believe they'll be fine. Lead story number 5 is the sport itself, and if you want to know why the sport is so deep right now, and why it's so hard for young talent to break through consistently, just look at Michael Mosman at RedBud. Last week, the silly season rumors went crazy, and in that mix was the discussion about Mosey and his ride for 2026. I mentioned it on this show, and I saw an interview where he said his boss told him to retire twice. Then he ends up on the podium, will most likely now get re-signed, which is deserved, but a spot that was maybe available for a younger rider is probably gone. That's the reality in the sport right now, and I think it needs to be addressed. The bottom line is Mosman is good, always has been, but it's all coming together in his mid-20s, and it's riders like this that are exactly why teams hesitate to throw everything behind younger, unproven kids. Look at Mitch and the veteran PC roster. He's dealing with this too. Team Green kids are spending their final amateur years riding Kawasaki's with nowhere to go when they turn 18. Right now, the sport is the most talented I've ever seen. With the 450 class still log jammed up by the 30-plus crew and a bunch of mid to late 20s veterans still figuring it out in the 250s, the class has gotten older, which causes issues downstream in the amateurs. Think about it. Jordan Smith won a 250 main this year. Max Anstey won a 250 main this year. RJ Hampshire won a 250 main this year. Cameron McAdoo was on the podium at Tampa, and now Mosman is back on the podium. These guys aren't moving up. There's nowhere to go, so they're resurging in the 250 class. And for a team, when you see that kind of age and experience delivering results, it's hard for them not to take the bait and give them another shot. This is why the 250 class is so stacked right now, which is fun on TV, but it's about to create a problem. There's a generation of kids ready to move up with nowhere to go. The current AMA 15, 16, and 17-year-old classes are really, really good, especially the AMA 15 class, which is the most stacked age class I've ever seen in this sport by far. Ever. And the logjam is going to push a bunch of them into the pros as privateers, and not all of them will be able to make it financially. I promise you that. Hundreds of thousands of dollars wasted with no shot. We have to, as a sport, look below the surface, and I don't think anyone is. Now, I'm not venting without purpose. I've thought about this heavily the last 3 years, and this goes back to lead story number 9, and my belief that it's time for a third class, the SMX Next class. The talent pool is too deep and too good to keep driving around in vans as pure amateurs racing exhibition races. Moving them up into the pros early is proven to not work either, but racing around in typical amateur nationals doesn't work either, and it's financially breaking these families. I believe we need to act fast and make this change to the sport next year. This is a good problem if fixed, and they've done everything correctly to prepare for it. Sorry to double down on the same topic twice in an episode, but I know all these kids. I talk to all these families daily. I know the history of this sport, and if we don't act fast, we're going to lose a bunch of these kids due to a lack of opportunities and a broken system. It's only a problem if nobody's got a solution, and in my opinion, this one is very simple. Let's call lead story number 4 for what it was. To us American fans, it was a beating on the 4th of July. RedBud, Independence Day weekend, the fans showing up loud, proud, and draped in red, white, and blue, expecting fireworks on and off the track and an Eli and Hayden win on Saturday, and instead the Aussies and a dude from Japan whooped that ass. Jett and Hunter Lawrence went 1-2 in the 450 class, running the table in back-to-back weekends, and I know, it's not new, we've seen this before, but this was on our birthday. In the 250s, Joe Shimoda looked better than I've ever seen him, maybe. He was calm, fast, and clinical, and I wish we would have had normal danger, because this looked like a Chance Hymas at Thunder Valley type ride from Joe, and I'm not so sure the outcome would have been different. It was big for Honda too. They swept both classes with the bosses in town. Still, if there was ever a day we needed someone to step up for the stars and the stripes, it was Saturday, and our 2 biggest names didn't deliver. Eli Tomac had a mechanical in Moto 1, then a flat-looking 7th in Moto 2. This is now 4 straight motos where the legend has been off, and I don't want to say that the fire's gone, but it's starting to look like we got something going on. I'm hoping it's just another random rough week and not a trend, but if we get a bad Millville, I'm gonna overreact. And then there's Deegs. He's been killing these guys all summer, but a crash in practice led to a few weird-looking slip-ups in the motos, and he pretty much had no fire all day. I typically like to take a shot or 2 at Deegs when he says or does something silly, and as much as the private jet and Lambo picks are baiting me in, I ain't gonna do it. Believe it or not, a Charlie horse is very hard to ride with. I've actually had it happen to me before, and it's brutal. You could barely lift your leg, and on that track, which took a lot of strength to go fast on, he was clearly not himself. So let's settle down, internet. As bad as he's been whooping everyone, and as bad as his 250 class has been getting beat up by the fans and media lately, including by me, the class is good enough right now that if Deegs is having an off day or is banged up and the edge is gone, they can still put one on him. Don't forget, Joe was the next best guy in this class when your 450 podium of Jett, Hunter, and Jay Coop were in the 250s. And when Jalik won High Point in 2021, it was Jett and Jay Coop second and third. So let's settle down on the talk that this 250 class is weak. That's not fair. But the truth is, although an Eli Tomac or Haiden Deegan win would have been awesome for the crazy and drunken fans at RedBud, Jett, Hunter, and Joe are still ours. We've adopted them, and their rides were some of the best we've seen all year, and the respect and admiration to the fans on the podium was cool to see. Also, shout out to Jett, who dedicated the race win to the Zing family. That was pure class. Lead story number 3 is the boss daddy, RJ Hampshire, who might have surprised a few people with that third in Moto 1, but at this point it shouldn't be a surprise anymore. Rick James is gnarly, plain and simple, and all he does is prove it over and over again. He had surgery on his wrist right before the season opener, right before. Then he just lines up in his first summer in the 450 class and starts putting it to these dudes. He rode the entire Supercross season banged up, told me straight up that he was riding at way under 100%, and still almost won the title in Salt Lake City. Although I wasn't all the way sold coming in, I'm a full-blown 450 believer now. At Southwick, he grabbed a 4th in a moto. At RedBud, it was a 3rd in Moto 1, and back at Daytona 2023, he won his very first 450 heat race against Chase Sexton, Jason Anderson, and Cooper Webb as a 250 guy getting his feet wet. The history books do show that RedBud is a great track for him. He won here in 2021 on a 250, beating this year's 450 podium, Jett, Hunter, and Jay Coop in their prime. And yeah, I'm done being surprised. RJ Hampshire has earned every bit of the respect he's getting. He's proven himself way too many times this season, and the question mark over his transition to the 450s is over. Nice work, Rick James. Let's take a little trip down memory lane for lead story number 2. 22 years ago, to be exact, it's 2003. You got Rhino on the KTM, Brownie on the PC Cowie, both on 125s, two old bulls battling it out week after week in the Nationals. I remember watching those motos when I was younger. They were pretty raw and legendary, and if I remember correctly, they didn't like each other very much back then. And now, here we are 2 decades later, and something pretty awesome just happened. Mike Brown, who was recently hurt pretty bad, I actually mentioned it on this show a few weeks back, well, he got a visitor last week in Ryan Hughes. That was way cool to see, and I was kind of surprised by it. Again, they didn't like each other much back then, but time passes, and what's left after racing is a bond that only this sport can create. That's the thing about moto. It runs deeper than race results and rivalries. You go through hell together, you battle hard, and at the end of it all, you're forever connected. Moments like this prove it. Rivals can reunite, not just out of nostalgia, but out of love for the sport and for what they actually meant to each other. Rhino and Brownie, 2 warriors turned brothers through racing. That's the kind of story that reminds us why this sport is so special. Speaking of rivalries, we've got one coming, and for our lead story this week, let's be real. Jett and Hayden have been dominating all year long, and they will be facing off very soon. Stop with the Hayden RedBud bashing for a second. I'm going to stat you all here in a minute. Outside of this past Saturday at RedBud, this summer has felt a lot like 2004. Back then it was RC and Stu, now it's Danger and Donuts, and we're all just kind of waiting around for them to get together. RC went perfect that year, 12 for 12 in the Premier class, and James won 11 of 12 on the 125. 2 heavyweights, each in their own lane, destroying everyone every weekend, and everyone knew what was coming, including them. That's exactly what we're watching now with Jett and Hayden. The energy, the vibe, the inevitable, it all feels the same to me. All right, time to stat you all with some interesting nuggets. Back in 2004, Stu's one-off day came at, get this, RedBud. He got 7th that day, his worst result of the year. Did people say he was slipping or wasn't for real? No. Everyone knew what was coming, and even with Hayden off on Saturday, it's obvious the dude is up 40+ points halfway through the season, and he's dominated for 2 straight years. Another stat while we're talking RedBud trivia, and just to further the point a little, Jett never won RedBud on a 250. Never. That's pretty weird when you scroll through the history, but to make it even weirder, he's never lost RedBud on a 450. Ever, including his first Motocross of Nations in his first 450 race. Meanwhile, Hayden's actually never won a single moto at RedBud, despite winning the overall twice. I guess it's just one of those weird tracks with weird history, but my point is none of these stats change what's coming. We're headed straight toward the crashing of 2 obvious super talents, Jett Lawrence and Haiden Deegan. It's not just hype anymore, it's happening. They both know it, and you all know it. At the latest, it starts next summer, but my instincts tell me it will be in Supercross 2026. I have strategic reasons why I think it should happen sooner, and I'll share those in a future episode. And we'll see you next week.
Main event motomerch.com. Main event motomerch.com. Main event motomerch.com.